Okay, fishing fanatics, here we go again. Welcome. Today we start with topwaters. And it's becoming increasingly hard for me because I feel like I'm lying to you every time I say, because this is one of my favorite techniques. And I was thinking about it the other day, and it's because I just love fishing. So they're all kind of my favorite technique. If I go fishing on a day, and that's the technique that works for me, that's one of my favorite techniques, and I love it. But today in particular, we're going to talk about these guys. Poppers. One of the oldest types of topwaters. They have played quite a significant role in my life as a fisherman, and not just with bass fishing, with many species of fish. It is one of the most simply designed baits and one of the easiest baits to use, but can be one of the most effective bass lures that you will ever buy. I have weighed, here I go with a personal story, guys. I have weighed in a tournament a bag of over 25 pounds on a popper under 2 inches in length. True story. And the water was fairly dirty. I found fish that were chasing bait up into a corner in the back of a small bay. I tried throwing soft jerk baits at them. I tried throwing soft stick bait Senkos at them. They wouldn't touch it. Didn't matter how I retrieved it. I tried a spinnerbait. They didn't want to know about it. I started throwing this, not this exact one, but a tiny little popper like this. And it drove them insane. And that all happened in the space of about 2 hours. I would catch a fish, move away, let it rest, let the area rest, because it's quite a commotion when they eat a popper. Come back, do the same thing, rinse and repeat. And ended up with a bag of just under 25 pounds on a popper, which is one of the best days fishing that I've ever had in my life. I think the reason that I love popper fishing so much is the bite is explosive. All topwater fishing usually results in explosive bites. But for whatever reason, and I think it could very well be the diminutive size of poppers, bass, they seem to make bass incredibly angry. Tackle for poppers are a 7-foot medium heavy rod, casting and spinning, is going to be just fine. You will battle a little bit to throw the smaller poppers on a 7-foot medium heavy, but if you are patient, you will get it done. The thing with poppers is the majority of them are quite light, so it is a little bit more difficult to throw on a 7-foot medium heavy casting setup. On the spinning setup, you'll have no problem. You just fire it out there, off it goes. This is a bass lure that every bass angler should own. A lot of people don't like them because they don't spend enough time throwing them and working them out. We're going to try and short circuit that today by going over a lot of things and a couple of tricks and tips to help you become a better popper fisherman. I'm going to tell you what my personal popper rod is that I use and why I use it. If you feel that this could be a technique that you could use on your chosen body or home body of water, or your chosen body of water very effectively, an idea may be to get a rod specifically not only for throwing poppers but for throwing topwater. So my popper rod, my topwater rod, is a 6'10" medium moderate. Now, we've spoken in a couple of other videos how fish like to or can tear away once they've hit a bait. They'll hit a bait and then they tear away, they turn their heads and they start swimming straight away. And with treble hook baits, it can be particularly troublesome. The reason that I like a moderate rod, medium action, moderate rod, is when I am fishing the popper, and we'll talk about retrieves a little bit later, I want the rod to give and pop back. But more specifically, when a fish hits the bait, I want it to be able to hit the bait, turn and swim without the hook pulling out of its mouth. And with the faster action rods or the heavier action rods, that can happen quite easily. They don't always get the popper completely T-boned like that in the mouth. That's how you want them to eat it, but they don't always eat it like that. Sometimes you just nick them with the back hook through the skin on their lip. And if you have a moderate, softer rod, medium rod, that can be very helpful when you're fighting the fish. As far as reels go, I prefer a slower reel on a casting setup, 6.3 to 1 to 7 to 1, because I work most of my top waters fairly slowly compared to other moving baits. Cut. This fly, man. Sorry about that. It had a fly buzzing around me. I want you guys to know that I hit it out of the air. One shot, it is dead. Moving on. Right, where were we? Reels. I like to work most top waters, not all, fairly slowly. So the speed of the reel is not that important. It's basically just for recovering and fighting the fish. Both spinning and casting. Line. This one is really important, guys. You can absolutely use braid, straight braid, for a popper. Personally, I like to use 14-pound monofilament, and this is probably the only application in my current fishing where I use monofilament. And yes, I do use braid for topwater fishing as well. I generally only use the braid when I'm around very heavy bank related cover. So if I'm throwing a topwater around heavy vegetation, if there's bushes where the fish can turn and go back into the bushes, if there's reeds where the fish can turn and go back into the bushes, I will use straight braid. It's a little bit tricky when you're using braid for topwater fishing because the fish can physically see the braid. So if you were fishing on a clear lake and you were using braid, it may be better to use a short leader of monofilament, just so that it keeps the lure afloat. You cannot use fluorocarbon for topwater fishing at all, because fluorocarbon sinks, it will destroy the action of your topwater bait. There's a couple of trains of thought as far as attaching the lure to the line, whatever that line might be. Personally, particularly with topwaters, I like to make sure that my topwaters all have a split ring. I don't like using a clip on topwaters. It can impede the action, and also when you are moving the bait, if it creates a little bow in the line close to the bait, that it usually ends up in the treble hooks, especially with braid. Particularly be aware of that, guys. If you're fishing braid with any kind of topwater, particularly poppers, but any kind of topwater, it has a tendency to catch the bottom hook. That's why I suggest using a short leader. It doesn't have to be very long, 12 to 18 inch leader of monofilament. I like to use 14-pound mono. Mono floats, it will not sink the popper. It also has some give to it when the fish comes up and hits the bait and tries to tear away. We spoke about the 7-foot medium heavy rod. When you are throwing bigger poppers, say like this guy, this is almost a 3-inch popper, you will have absolutely no problem throwing this bait with a 7-foot medium heavy. When you get to smaller poppers like this little guy, you will still be able to throw it with some practice, but the stiffness of the rod might cause the popper to jump out of the water because of the way the bait is designed. Okay, so what makes a popper a popper? We've spoken a little bit about tackle. What we need to be able to throw a popper, but why is a popper so effective? What makes it different from every other bait? Well, there is really no other bait like it except for maybe a popping frog. They all have one thing in common. They've all got that cupped or concave mouth that when you pull the bait forward, it pops or it bloops. Now, the construction. A popper is a floating bait, so there's not usually a lot of weight in poppers. Most of the weight is normally at the back of the bait, and that's made so that it sits in a slightly head up orientation, so that when you pop your rod tip, the mouth comes forward and it pops, it moves water, it spurts water, it bloops, whatever the case is, and then some of them have a rattle in them. Many different sizes and shapes, and these are obviously all the unpainted ones, and the ones which are frankly my favorite styles of poppers. I have many different ones, but these are my favorite styles. Now, in amongst the poppers, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because if you look at the different shapes of the mouths, they all have the same basic shape, but some of them are shallower, some of them are heavily cupped, and some of them are super shallow. So why is that? Well, within the category of poppers, you would get, there's a couple of different things. You have actually a popper, which when you pop it, it spits water and it makes a bloop sound or a pop sound. And then you have something called a chugger, which although it still looks like a popper, it has a very shallow mouth, and it's more of a fast action bait where you chug, 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 and it doesn't have a loud popping sound. It's just more of a spit. It spits the water away from it. So the construction of the popper in general is fairly straightforward. There's nothing complicated about it at all. Maybe in the design, it's very complicated, but the actual construction is pretty much the same with all poppers that you look at. They have a big weight at the back, maybe a couple of small BB rattles in them, but they all need to sit with their in a mouth up position for when you start to work the baits. So let's have a look at a couple of different configurations. This is an Azuma Popper Z. Very nice bait, big eyes. Guys, the one thing that I want you to realize, and this is something always a bone of contention, but it's just something you need to be aware of. The most important thing on a popper is the bottom color. When a bass eats a popper, obviously it usually eats it from below. There are some scenarios where the bass will actually jump out the water and eat it from above. But most of the time, the color that it's going to see is this bottom color. Important things to look for when you're buying a quality popper or buying a popper and possibly changing out the hardware. Obviously, the hooks are critical. If the hooks are of bad quality, remember guys, when bass eat poppers, they eat them quite violently. So if the hooks are poor quality, you've done all the work to get the fish to eat the popper, it grabs the bait, it's got poor hooks on it, and it just bends the hooks out, and that's it. That's the end of that. Okay, so that's an Azuma. That's Azuma Pop Z in like a baby bass pattern. Here's another kind of a bass pattern. Pearl bottom's kind of an emerald shiner type deal with a kill spot on it. The feathered trebles, guys, what that does is it provides some degree of attraction, but also what it does is it slows the bait down. When you pop it forward, that's dragging in the water, so you can make either a lot more pops if you want to, or longer pops. We'll talk about the retrieves a little bit later. That's a striking bait. Here's one of the OGs in the game. That's a Rebel Pop R. That's a very good bait. I've caught a lot of fish on this bait. There's another one. This one is in a chrome color. Also a very good color for when fish to see from the bottom. Looks like a belly of a bait fish, and it flashes and reflects. So that's a sexy shad color. This is a no-name brand one, but it's got like a foil reflector in it. You can see that It just flashes like that. It's a pretty little bait. I can't even remember what it is. I've had it for such a long time, but it's a good little bait when they are keying in on smaller bait fish. And then here's a couple of mine. That's kind of a copy of a small popper in bone. You'll notice the baits that I paint myself is only a couple of colors. Bone. And then this is a mega bass copy, and that's in black. My two favorite colors for topwater fishing are bone and black. It just works for me. So, what kind of places do you throw poppers? Where's the best place to throw a popper? And again, it's very broad strokes on this, guys, but wherever you can get to an area that does not have cover that is too thick, you can pretty much throw a popper. But remember, what you're trying to imitate is a small fleeing baitfish or an injured baitfish. So, like so many of the other videos that we've done on techniques and tactics and tackle, we start here again. They are best suited to shallow water. So you can see here on the map it's marked in green. And yes, we've got docks. And there may be shallow rocks up in the shallow water. Or there may be scattered stumps in the shallow water. Scattered vegetation, submerged vegetation. Poppers are very good fished over the top of submerged vegetation. You can imagine yourself, the vegetation is down here, and that little popper can pop, 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 pop over the top of the submerged vegetation. Anything that's living in there is coming to fetch it. It's just a fact of life. You can use poppers over deeper water that is relatively close to shallow water, particularly in lakes where you have pelagic baitfish species. However, in those situations, you would probably be better suited to using a chugging type of bait, a bait that you don't have to pop and stop, pop and stop. You just want to keep moving it constantly, chug, 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 chug. It's throwing a little bit of water. It's not necessarily making a lot of noise, but it's flashing on the surface and it's zigzagging from side to side. So areas adjacent to shallows where you may have a drop-off, say, for example, along here, where you've got super shallow water that just drops away into the deep, and along there, these kind of areas here. In clean water, a popper will call fish from a long way, a long, long way, particularly, but not exclusively, smallmouth love poppers in cleaner water. You can call a popper up from 10, 15 foot of water on a popper, and it will come up and smash a popper on the surface. When you're throwing a popper around isolated structure or cover, for example, there's a rock sticking out the water, there's a stump coming off the bank, there's a blowdown tree lying from the bank into the water, a row of reeds maybe that's running parallel to the bank or making points coming off the bank. Although you have to be a little bit more careful when you cast the popper, it can be really effective to draw fish from that cover. You don't need to go into the cover like we discussed in the previous video with the Texas rigging, when you physically when you're pitching a Texas rig where you have to physically get it into the cover. If you can get your popper fairly close to that cover or that structure, say a boulder that's sticking out the water or just below the water surface, without it getting hung up on whatever the cover or structure might be, and you can pop and stop close to that, you may well be able to draw fish away from that cover and to your popper, because it is such a loud bait. So what time of year is the best time of year for throwing a popper? I have personally not had a lot of success on poppers in very cold water. I have caught fish on them in very cold water, but I have not had a lot of success where I can say that's something that I want to go and do again. In my opinion, the best time of year for poppers would be starting kind of late spring. When the bass are starting to think about bedding, that's when you can break out the poppers. A lot of times you will find poppers that are painted up in a sort of a bluegill pattern. Bluegill are nest raiders when bass are spawning, and they will be infuriated by something buzzing over the top of their, or popping over the top of their beds. However, don't rule out the bone, guys. Do not rule out the bone. I don't know what it is about this bone color, but it gets the job done just about the whole year. And like I said, when I paint my own baits, I have my own version of bone. So I throw bone color about 85% of the time. So starting in the spring, when the fish are on, the bass are on beds, that's when I would start to throw a popper, when the water starts to warm. In the summer, they're very good early morning and late evening. During the day, it gets a little bit more tricky because with the high sun and warm temperatures, fish tend to look for areas where they can hide up during the periods of high light a lot of the time, unless you've got a lake that's got heavily stained water, in which case their feeding windows will be longer. And then my personal favorite time of the year to fish with a popper is probably in the fall. When fish start to feed up for the winter, they can be tricked slightly easier than the rest of the year, except obviously when they're on the beds. And a popper in the fall or the autumn time can be absolutely a lethal bait, absolutely lethal. Particularly when fish are roaming. If you've got a lake with in the late fall or mid to late fall where fish start to roam the banks looking for bait fish, a popper can call them in from a long way. You can have explosive action on poppers in the mid to late fall. In fact, one of the trips that I did to America, most of the guys were winding it up bass fishing for the year in the very late fall when I was there, and a friend of mine and myself went out and absolutely slaughtered fish, fishing poppers parallel to deeper docks that were sort of from 6 to 10 feet of water. And I mean slaughtered them. We were annihilating 4 and 5 pound fish, largemouth and smallmouth on the same lake. It's one of the best fishing trips I've ever had. So what about weather conditions? Well, we've touched on that briefly when we spoke about time of year. There's not really a best or worst weather condition for poppers. I've caught them on sunny days on a popper, absolutely lights out, and I've caught them on overcast days on a popper. So to say they only work on sunny days or they only work on cloudy days, it's a bit of a misnomer. They certainly work for big fish. They certainly, in my experience, work better in low light conditions, so early morning, late afternoon. But I don't think the weather plays a major role when you're fishing a popper. They don't work particularly well directly after a cold front because the fish are generally not looking up at that point. And you need fish to be looking up for them to eat poppers. Water temperature, we touched on that as well briefly. They are not optimal in very, very cold water. It doesn't seem to be the time of year that you want to throw a popper. I am sure that you will catch a lot more smallmouth in cooler water than you would largemouth with a popper. But I have not had great success. Even when I lived in South Africa, even in the wintertime in South Africa, where I lived in South Africa, it didn't get that cold. But even then in the winter, they weren't that great. And that's just my personal experience. You may well live in an area where it doesn't get that cold in the winter and you can carry on slaughtering them in the wintertime on a popper. Okay, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but what are we looking for when we're buying a popper? You want to go out and you start looking and you want to buy your first lot of poppers. You could start that by working out what color the bait fish are in your particular body of water. Or you could forego all of that and just get a black one or a bone one, because they're going to work anyway. If you want to go the other route, get some good quality photos offline of what those particular baitfish look like, the colors. Most baitfish have either a pearl or a silver belly, so you can't go wrong with that. If you find a popper that you like and it doesn't have particularly good hooks on it, that's fine. As I recall, this bait here didn't have good hooks on it when I bought it, and I just took it out the packet, took the hooks off, threw them away, and just immediately replaced them. And that's pretty much it for buying them. You find poppers in all price ranges, from a couple of dollars up to $40, $50, $60, depending what you're looking at. But again, as with all things fishing tackle, it's a personal choice thing. You're going to find the one that works the best for you, but in the process of getting there, you're going to buy lots of them, because that's what we do, and they all have different applications. Let's talk about the retrieve. Like with all other individual lures or techniques that we've spoken about, there's a couple of scenarios with poppers. When the water is warmer, not always, but when it is warmer, you can move them a little bit faster. Now, we discussed, or we will discuss later on, the different types of poppers that you get and the way that they're designed. With the baits that have the very cupped mouths, let's see if we can get that in focus there. It makes more of a popping sound. It throws more water. It's more of a bloop. So I like to do a couple of cadences that I like with these are pop, pop, stop, and let it sit, or pop, 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 and stop, and let it sit. And basically what that does is, as well as popping, it makes the bait walk from side to side and pop at the same time. The harder you pop your rod tip, the more water it will move and the louder the noise will be. If you're fishing with a chugger type bait that has the very shallow mouth, you can fish them a lot faster. A good example of a very good chugger would be a chug bug. Those you can fish almost like a regular walking bait, which we'll get to later on. And you can literally pop, 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 and it will just zigzag like this and just spit a little bit of water. When the water is slightly cooler, one of the retrieves that I like to do is pop, pop, and then I will let it sit. It can be very frustrating, but it can also be very productive. So I will pop, pop, and let it sit. Count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pop, pop, let it sit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Also, in water that is slightly more stained, it can be helpful to have a longer pause between pops. One of the other things that you need to be aware of, not so much in stained water, but when you are fishing it where the water is stained to clear or very clear. One of the things that's always stood me in good stead, and it was taught to me by my earliest bass fishing mentor, when you're fishing any kind of topwater, but particularly a popper, once you've fired it out and the popper has hit the water, let the ripples around the bait settle before your first pop. I've asked a lot of guys, and I've even spoke to a couple of pros about that, guys that I know that fish poppers, what the reasoning is for that. And the only thing that they can come up with, and also if you work it out yourself, when something lands on the water, grasshopper, frog, whatever the case is, when it initially lands on the water, if you watch terrestrial creatures, when they hit the water, they don't move. And I don't know if that is a survival response or a panic response or what the case is, but they don't move. They will sit for a few seconds and then they will start to move. In a scenario where the popper is being used to imitate a bait fish, it's slightly different because you want that thing darting and moving all the time. Particularly in lakes that have pelagic style bait fish, shad, blueback herring, that type of thing. Schooling bait fish. your cadence can be a lot quicker. So it would be like a pop, 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 pause, pop, 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 pause when the water is warmer. When the water is colder, like we've said, just slow down. As we discussed earlier, I have not had a great deal of success in super cold water on a popper. I am sure you could still catch them on a popper if you spent time on it, but there's far more effective baits to use when the water is really cold. In the summertime, when it gets super hot and fish push up shallow early morning, late evening, you may want to slow your retrieve down slightly with the lower light conditions. So what about the bite? Well, the bite can tie in directly with the retrieve. Of all the popper fishing that I've done, there's usually only 3 types of bite. The first one doesn't happen very often, but is the most exciting bite that there is in bass fishing, in my opinion. And if you look on the intro of my video, you will actually see a photo that my wife took of it happening. You'll be popping the bait, and all of a sudden, a foot away from the bait, a bass will erupt out of the water and try and eat it from above. I would say the success rate on that bite is about 50%, but it doesn't really matter because watching it happen more than makes up for a lost fish. It is absolutely unbelievable to watch it happen, especially at close quarters. Most of the bites that you will see on a popper you'll be pop, 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 pop. You may see the fish for a split second before it happens, but all that will happen is there will just be a massive boil, the popper will be gone, and you'll be tight to the fish. Most of the time when fishing poppers, you don't have to set the hook. They hook themselves. That's why it's so important to make sure that your hooks are not dull. And the only other real bite that I've seen with a popper, and it's generally speaking when the water is either super clear or when it may be slightly colder. Sometimes after a cold front they bite like that as well. Is they come up, you'll be popping away, and they just come up behind the bait, and the best way I can describe it is they almost sip the bait or they suck the bait down. But it's a lot of the time you don't even know that it's happened. They kind of get below the bait and you'll be popping and pausing and not much is going on, and you'll be popping and pausing, and all of a sudden the popper's gone. And it's almost like they just come up underneath it. No bad words. They come up underneath the bait and they just like that, and they just suck it down and it's gone, and there'll just be a little ripple where the popper used to be. This can be quite disconcerting when you're having a slow morning and you're popping away, looking around. We like to call it the look away bite, where you're not watching the bait and you look back and all you see is a small disturbance on the surface and a head, a mouth like that, and your bait is gone. Very exciting stuff. Very, very exciting stuff. Guys, that's going to do it for poppers. It's not a really very difficult thing. Like with all other styles of bait that we've spoken about, the fish will tell you how they want you to retrieve it. If you're going out there fishing and you popping away and you're not getting bit and you know that they should be eating a popper, you've got good conditions, stable conditions, speed up your retrieve a little bit. Try pop, 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 stop. Or if that's how you are retrieving at the time, or you're throwing a chugger, maybe change over to an actual popper and not a chugger, and slow your retrieve right down. Pop, pop, stop. Pop, pop, stop. The fish will tell you how they want it. Remember what I said to you guys. This is my top tip for poppers. If you're uncomfortable buying baits because there's so many different colors to choose from, with poppers, 2 colors are going to get it done for you. Bone and black. And a guideline for that, when it's overcast, throw black, and when it's sunny, throw bone. If their fish are eating topwaters, they will eat one of those 2 colors. Doesn't matter where in the world that you live, and I know that this is hard to believe. but they will eat those two colors. I hope you found this session today helpful, guys. I would really love it if you all got out there and started throwing poppers. It is the most exciting way to catch a bass. All topwater fishing is, but popper fishing really is. It's very visual. A lot of the time they hit the bait right in front of you. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you all next time.